to moderate the session on challenges and opportunities in achieving Sustainable Development Goals in Asia and the Pacifics, and in expanding social protection for all. Let's give a warm welcome to Ms. Chiara Bronchi and our panelists.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this wonderful event and panel. We have three fantastic speakers with a lot of experience, and we will try to stick to an hour, but I will introduce them now. And we want also to have about 15 minutes of questions. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Yula Sawati. She is the Director of Poverty Reduction and Social Welfare, Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, in Indonesia. Her responsibility is to develop policy strategy and programs in poverty reduction and welfare, as well as to set up budget, money, regulatory framework, and governance. She has been a lead contributor in designing Indonesia's community-driven development, conditional cash transfer, and social safety nets programs. She is now leading the transformation of integrated social assistance and subsidy reform, G2P, payments, and integrated service and referral systems. She has a wonderful experience, is over 20 years of commitment to this agenda. She has a PhD in planning and development from the University of South California, a master in urban and regional planning from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the US, and also a bachelor from the University of Indonesia. And she is one of the major experts in Indonesia to talk about social protection and also poverty reduction. Vivi, join me on the floor. A big applause for Vivi. And then we have Valérie Schmidt. She's Deputy Director of Social Protection Department in International Labour Organization, ILO, from now onwards. And Valérie is a Deputy Director, she's based in Geneva. She's also leading the ILO's flagship program on building social protection floors for all. And she holds a Master of Advanced Studies in Quantitative Economics from Paris Sciences Économiques, and a Master of Business Administration with honors from ESSEC. And she holds a bachelor degree from philosophy from the University of Paris 4, La Sorbonne. And Ms. Schmidt is joining ILO, she joined ILO in 2003, and she also has 20 plus years of progressively responsible professional experience in ILO and in this agenda of social protection and participation. And I'd like to invite her to join us on the floor. Welcome, Valérie. And then we have Ermina Soku. Ermina Soku is a social affairs officer in the Sustainable Socioeconomic Transformation section of the Social Development Division of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP, now onwards, in Bangkok. She's leading the division's work on measuring and addressing inequality with a focus on inequality of opportunity and promoting inclusive social protection systems. She has previously worked on environmental management and on program management for the UN in Bangkok and in Beirut. She has an MA in economics from the Tufts University and an MA in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School, also Tufts University. Ermina, welcome to join us. So as you know, there is growing consensus in international development debates that social protection plays a key role not only for social, but also for economic and political development of countries. So it is explicitly mentioned as a key instrument for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal 1 on eradication of income poverty, but also Sustainable Development Goal 10, reduction of income and inequality, and also key for the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals 2 to 6, which is about ending hunger, healthy lives, education, gender equality, access to water. So in other words, social protection has a much more transversal impact than we are led to think. And these panelists have spent also a lot of time in measuring impact as well. So I really want to give them the floor to tell us what are their findings and where we should look at moving forward. Thank you. And Dr. Vivi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chiara, for nice presentation. Hello, everyone. Very good morning to all of you. It's been a pleasure to see a lot of familiar faces in this event, and thank you also for having me in this session. I would start with the presentations to share some slides, what we experienced thus far about challenges and opportunity in achieving SDGs, particularly in relate to the social protection expansion in Indonesia. As you may heard in from the earlier session that Indonesia experiencing steady growth, which make our poverty has been declined so far and also created jobs. However, we still faces the challenges, particularly to get to the next level of development. Indonesia now is part of the lower middle income country. We are hoping that within the next 5 years we'll get the upper middle middle income country. So currently we also experiencing a slower growth, weak productivity, and also a big number of the vulnerable middle class. With the lower poverty rate, currently we hit to one or single digit, 9.4%. However, it is harder to reach the remaining poorest who have complex set of circumstances that make it harder to move out of the poverty. We also have to ensure that the people above the poverty is not moved back to the poverty. They are quite significant number. It's about 54 million people that are considered vulnerable. So beside the chronic poverty that are hidden in remote as well as far-flung areas, we also have to consider in terms of the strategy how to handle this vulnerable group. They are the ones that are prone to move back to the poverty in the time of any shock. Could be in a prolonged sick or lost the job. When the economic crisis, food the price inflation, as well as in the disaster. So all the strategy that we know as a social protection thus far cannot be stands out alone. It needs to mix with other strategies in more comprehensive way. A couple of strategies that we need to or have been started with collecting and developing what we call as a unified database. It's been started since 2006. It was the time when many of us experiencing food, fuel, and financial crisis. At that time, the government has to innovate a new strategy which is more targeted. So starting in 2005, the Central Bureau of Statistics did a census to collect by name, by address, and later on by ID. Currently, we have around 99.3 million people. Is considered around 31.4 million families that have been updated twice a year. So every January and July, the Minister of Social Affairs enacted the updated data of the unified database. The updating process involved the local government. There are a couple of mechanisms, including the on-demand application, as well as active outreaching by the social workers and one-stop shop or office in district areas. So currently, this UDB has been a basis for many social protection programs as well as other programs that are intended for poverty reduction. It creates expansion, open the opportunity of the expansion of the telecommunication and the signal network that was initially is hard to do. So it's involving the Ministry of Communication to support the digitizing of the government transfer. It also promote the financial inclusion as well as the local economy by expanding the local bank and the bank agents. Implementation is the key in this regard. So having continuous coordination, collecting the data, measuring the performance regularly, and also pick a capable team are the keys. Currently, UDB ties to the civil registry as well as the health insurance database. Other key opportunity that we have when we are talking about the social protection, inevitably we are talking about where the money comes from. So as mentioned as VP in earlier session, reforming the current budget is one way that we have thus far. So in the below block, the lowest block at the left-hand side, it's about reducing the subsidy is quite big in 2015. Up until now, it's been reduced from 3.4% to only 0.8% out of the GDP. That's the remaining subsidy. We are gonna continue the reform on the subsidy by currently analyzing other subsidy, including the LPG, the electricity, as well as the fertilizer. So by having more funding in the government budget, we could have a progress of the social protection programs, be it at the coverage as well as the benefit package. Besides that, we could also expand the beneficiary of the insurance, mainly for the paying a premium of the poor families. In addition, we could also enlarge the regional transfer in the form of the village transfer to reduce the inequality. We are currently in the progress to explore as well as piloting some innovative financing instrument, not only from the private but also from the public. So the public here, including the other sources coming from the social enterprises and the philanthropy, for example. As quite many Muslim beneficiaries, we exploring the use of the suku. Suku is the Islamic mechanism of, along with the zakat, using some Sharia principles to finance some development projects, including hydro power, developing seed activities, seed innovation activities in some regions, and also having a blended finance, particularly to finance SDGs projects. And also currently using partnership with many social impact investors, we are exploring the developing of the social impact fund. For example, we and UNICEF now develop development impact bond for family separation. That's already get support from the UBS, the bank at the European basis. The other strategies that I'm going to talk about is about the empowering people and the inclusive, in ensuring the inclusiveness. Last week I was in Hanoi for discussing about the inclusive innovation. It's very interesting to find out that many youngsters, bright ones, talking or have a good deed to solve poverty or inequality. It's hard to believe that they come and talks about how that innovation, the technology and apps could not only leapfrogging, but also moonshot. I think in many places, like in Indonesia, when we are talking about the eastern part or in the Philippines, talking about the south part, we need to find about the ways to not only leapfrogging, but the moonshot things. So mainly when we are talking about inclusiveness, we have to ensure that the marginal groups, also the gender and several other groups are inclusive. It's not about mainstreaming and also make a specific target to this marginalized group, but it also involving kind like changing the mindset of all of us. For example, that the people are working is not always with the food, but can be role on the wheel. So by having the different mindset about the inclusiveness, we could provide more inclusive strategies. Achieving near universal basic services, of course, we are not talking about only about the health, but it could start with the registering everybody since birth. So ensuring that everybody get a passport to any basic services by put them into a civil registry. And then South-South triangular cooperation is also a shortcut not to learn everything from the zero. So having an event like this is really a good opportunity to share. But of course, one point that I need to point out, it need to be reflects local context. The social values and also to really help how to solve a problem of the communities at the end. When we are talking about best practices or having some good explanation, good example. So at the end, broad inclusive national process and strategic partnership, that's the thing that we still on progress because by having the same agenda, we could go hand in hand to on the moon shooting over 2030. It starts not only from the government and the NGOs, but also involving the parliament, having they are acknowledgeable about the gaps and where to go through the development of the roadmap or indicators would be a good experience for us to really bring any partners to be on board in order ensuring the inclusiveness. I think that's all that I could share. Happy to have your comments and in the discussion further. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivi. Thank you for this overview about the government of Indonesia approach. I find it's what is amazing is the database. And I think that leapfrogging is important, finding innovation is important, but having the analytical basis and knowing who your poor are or the most vulnerable part of the population seems to me a bit the foundation in order even to leapfrog. And so a lot for us to learn in terms of how to manage also this massive database, 40% of the population, 99 million citizens with different levels of poverty and vulnerability. It's really amazing how Indonesia has been able to gauge this. And now I think also what we are hearing is the need to maintain it. So to have also the right governance structure and institutional capacity to keep this alive in order then to enable innovation and changes and how to address it. Thank you so much. I want to give the floor to Valérie. Please.
So, ladies and gentlemen and dear colleagues, I'm really delighted to be with you here in Manila for this Asia Pacific Social Protection Week. So I would like to thank the ADB for inviting the ILO. I'm representing the ILO in Geneva, but I have also many colleagues here in this room who are working here in Asia with you. So this year, the International Labour Organization celebrates its 100th anniversary. We were born in 1919. And this centenary offers us two opportunities, to look back at the past and also to celebrate ILO's history and achievements, and also to look forward to our future. So next slide. Social protection, can you go to the, it's me? All right, sorry. This one? Okay. Yeah, thanks. So social protection, as all of you know, is a human right. But it's not only a human right. It's also an economic and social necessity, and it makes economies more productive and societies equitable. And we also know that it helps protecting the planet. So this graph shows, for instance, the relation between, or the correlation between investing in social protection and poverty reduction. There are now very interesting studies undertaken in Brazil by the University of Sao Paulo, and demonstrating that $1 invested in cash transfers in social protection, cash transfers and other social services, generates $1.5 in GDP growth within a few months. So we really have more and more evidence on the role of social protection in boosting the economy. And I have problem with technology, as usual. I can help. But if Wifi can help me, so thank you. Which one do you do? It's these ones, okay. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So this is why closing the social protection gap is really at the heart of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And as was mentioned by our moderator, Target 1.3 urges countries to implement nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for all, including social protection floors. So this Target 1.3 really recalls us that social protection is not nice to have, it's really a right, because we are talking about social protection for all. So at the ILO, we love statistics and we love also graphical representation. And I think this map is very interesting because you see the development of social security over the past 100 years. So you can see that us, but also our predecessors have worked really hard to make the right to social security a reality for all. So 100 years ago, actually only a few countries had social protection systems in place. So you can see in at the beginning of the century, the map was more like gray and light blue. But today, in 2015, and now we have an updated map for 2019, the scope of almost all countries have at least one law or one social protection scheme. And you can see that the map becomes darker and darker because more and more countries have more comprehensive social protection systems. It means they have developed not only one law, one scheme, but many schemes covering more and more people and more branches, so pension scheme, healthcare schemes, disability schemes, maternity, etc. However, what this graph and these beautiful maps doesn't tell us is that in most developing and middle-income countries, existing social protection systems mainly cover the formal sector workers and leave indeed the vast majority of the population, so the workers in the informal economy, and now we have the workers in new forms of employment, without any protection. So at the ILO, we produce statistics, and we have a global social protection database. Actually, we are custodian for this database that measures SDG 1.3.1, which is the indicator of coverage for SDG 1.3. And we know that over the world, even in our modern world, with impressive economic progress and prosperity in many regions, more than half, so 55% of the world's population lives without any protection against the life's most serious risks. So it can be unemployment protection, it can be pensions, it can be healthcare, disability, etc. So in Asia, if you look at the statistics in Asia, we have 38.9% of the population that has at least protection against one risk, which means that 61% has nothing. So the exclusion in Asia is 61% of the population without any protection. And as you know, the global population increases by 83 million people per year. So this means that if we want to reduce coverage gaps, we really need to extend coverage to over 83 million people every year. So achieving universal coverage is even more difficult in a context of demographic changes. What is also striking with this map is that actually these coverage gaps are linked with underinvestments in social protection. Globally, countries spend on average 2.5% of their GDP on public social protection expenditure. Well, in Asia and the Pacific, we are better off with an average of 7.4% on average spent on countries' GDP for public social protection. However, this hides huge disparities between, of course, if you look at the map, Japan and Korea, who have high levels of expenditures in percentage of their GDP, and other countries that you can see on this map that are more in the light colors or even white. So one of the first priority, I would think, is to I need your help. Yeah, that's good. A first priority would be to really extend the fiscal space for social protection, as Ipu Fifi mentioned earlier. We know that establishing at least a basic, what we call the social protection floor, which is a basic set of social protection benefits, including basic pension, disability allowances, child benefits, etc., is affordable in most countries. we have produced a study on where we try to calculate the cost of the social protection floor. And on average, in 100 countries, on average, it costs only 1.6% of GDP, which means that countries would need to add this 1.6% of GDP to what they spend today. Actually, they should add a little bit less than 1.6% of GDP because many already finance a share of the social protection floor. So there are many ways to increase fiscal space. The most common ones are, of course, increasing tax revenues, and this was done, for instance, in Mongolia with taxes on natural resources. It can be by reallocating public expenditure, as was done in Thailand 20 years ago or 15 years ago when they started investing massively in healthcare coverage. Expanding social security coverage through contributory schemes, and this happens a lot in Latin America, where the idea is to really expand social insurance, so adapted social insurance to informal economy workers and their families through adapted systems, through simplified registration, etc. And I know that many countries are exploring this avenue also in Asia. So this generates more resources for social protection, and at the same time, it relieves the government's budget because the share on social assistance becomes lower. But there are many other ways of expanding the fiscal space, and we can discuss that later on. What also is interesting in our work at the ILO is that more and more we are really working with also international financing institutions, and we hope with the ADB on social protection and public finance management to really look at ways to increase fiscal space for social protection. And we have a new large project financed by the European Commission that will really dedicate efforts on this subject that will be co-implemented by UNICEF and a global coalition of NGOs. To accelerate, the extension of coverage to those who are still excluded from social protection, the United Nations have launched in 2009 the Social Protection Floor Initiative. And today we have really assessed what was the impact of this social protection floor concept and the recommendation that the ILO had adopted on the social protection floor. And the impact actually is amazing in terms of the development of comprehensive social protection systems. The idea is not to have a silo approach, but really to try to look at the development of the social protection system as a whole and to try to really fill all the gaps where they are. And also all this work on the social protection floor had a major impact on the extension of coverage to previously excluded populations. And actually, countries have really developed different types of extension strategies. One of them, the first one I would say on this graph, is really to extend coverage through non-contributory schemes. So as we mentioned before, it was the case of Thailand for healthcare. To extend coverage through adapted social insurance. So here we have the example of the Philippines that I was mentioning, but also Malaysia, who is now developing a special program for Grab and Uber and taxi drivers. Then there are also, what is also very important is to continue to not only to ensure that the population has access to a basic social protection floor, but to try to ensure that this coverage becomes more and more adequate. And this is the third arrow, if you see on this graph, ensuring that social protection becomes more adequate by increasing the levels of benefits. These are just the countries that have achieved universal coverage already. So now let's look at the future. I think we have done quite a lot of work at the ILO over the past 2 years on what is the future of work and what will be the implications for social protection. So very briefly, this is a report you can find on our website which is a report of a global commission on the future of work that provides quite an interesting vision of the world where we live today, that is really marked by a persistence challenge that is huge, which is of course the persistence of the informal economy, and new challenges that are the transformative change in the world of work driven by technological innovations. So this is all the discussions on the future of work, this Uber, taxi drivers, platform workers, etc. How can we ensure that these people also have access to social protection? Another challenge is the demographic changes, demographic shifts that have huge implications for the social protection systems, including, of course, the pensions, but not only. The challenge of climate change that shows that social protection is more in need than ever, but at the same time that it needs to adapt itself so that it can really provide the needed protection to the population, but also to facilitate the green transition. And the last challenge is globalization. Globalization meaning that more and more people live, for instance, work in the global supply chains and may not have adequate protection, whereas the buyers should also exercise this responsibility. So to really face these challenges, including in the area of social protection, this Global Commission has really set a very, very ambitious agenda and calls all countries to really expand coverage for all. So this is a very strong message by this Commission. And based on the Global Commission report at the International Labour Conference this year, which was our conference for the centenary, so a very, very important event, we have adopted, all the ILO member states, so governments, workers, and employers' organizations have adopted the Declaration on the Future of Work that provides guidance to the organization for the next 100 years, if you want, and provides a vision and orientations, including for the development of social protection. So we are now working on the implementation of this vision. So the first thing, and it will be my last point, the first thing is really to ensure that social protection systems and floors are stronger than ever. They should be able to continue to protect people through a combination of universal tax-based schemes and contributory social insurance, and provide progressively higher levels of benefits. So our first ambition, of course, is to continue the extension of social protection. The second ambition is that social protection needs to adapt to the changing world. It needs to adapt to the transformations of the world of work, where people are more mobile than ever. They change jobs across their careers, they change countries. So we really need to adapt our systems to this human and labor mobility. Social protection needs to respond to the needs of the population that are victims of climate change. And it needs also to be here to facilitate the green transition. For instance, I know that in the Philippines, there is a new law on unemployment insurance that was adopted at the end of last year. This unemployment insurance scheme is very important because it will really help to establish progressively green policies in the Philippines. And the third point is that the social protection systems need to adapt to the demographic challenges, provide adequate protection to older people, both in terms of pensions, access to healthcare and long-term care, but also to offer young generations with the possibility to build their future. By doing all this, we really reaffirm ILO's principles that are related to social protection. One of them is the principle of solidarity, which means that social protection is not only about rights, but it's also about obligations. And we need to create a level playing field, not only at country level, but globally as well, to ensure that everybody can be protected. So this would be, I think, my last point. The last thing I wanted to say is that we have launched a global partnership for universal social protection, USP 2030. Indonesia is already a member of the steering committee of this global partnership. It is open to all countries. So if you want to join all these partners, these institutions, including the ILO, World Bank, but also many UN agencies. And I know that ADB is also interested to join the partnership. So please come to see us, me or my colleagues, and we will provide more information on how to join this partnership. And we are organizing a Global Social Protection Week, so it's like the sister of this present Asian Social Protection Week. At the end of November, it will be a massive event as well, where all the practitioners will be able to discuss about the future of social protection. But at the same time, we will have very high-level panels from the UN to look at the social protection system around the world and what the UN is doing, and as well to try to increase the commitments in terms of financing social protection. Ibu Vivi has mentioned a number of innovations in Indonesia to increase the fiscal space. These kind of discussions are very important, and I think sharing this type of experience is super important for other countries. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm sorry I took more time.
Thank you, Valerie. Please, Armina.
My turn. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much for inviting ESCAP to be in this panel, and I'm very honored to be with my fellow co-speakers. So ESCAP is, as you know, the Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific, is the regional arm of the UN in Asia and the Pacific, dealing with economic and social issues. And social protection is, thank you, is increasingly rising in our agenda and in the agendas of our member states. We share more or less the same membership as the ADB. So 53 states and 53 members and 9 associate members. So among them, we see social protection increasingly high in the discussions, in the expenditure levels, and we saw the map that Valerie just showed where the Asia-Pacific region is getting bluer and bluer. And this has increasingly been happening also since the adoption of the 2030 agenda. I think the past few years we've seen a lot of progress and proliferation of schemes. But I want to draw your attention in this slide on a couple of lines. We've seen a lot of this data before, and at ESCAP we also like to work with ILO data mostly. We group it for our region and our geographical sub-regional groupings. So the red line is the Asia-Pacific average expenditure of public expenditure on social protection as a share of GDP. And this is only for ESCAP developing countries. So it excludes Japan and Australia and other countries that spend much closer to the global average. So it is at around 3.7%, which is 1/3 of the global average of 11.2%. So this is 1/3 of the global average. On the right side of the slide, you will see North and Central Asian countries, and most of them spend above average. On the left-hand side, it would be South and Southwest Asian countries. Most of them spend below average, with the exception of Sri Lanka, Turkey, and Iran. Iran and Turkey are westernmost member states. Southeast Asia is in the middle, and you'll see that most countries in Southeast Asia spend below the Asia-Pacific average, the Asia-Pacific developing countries average. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and if you see the green line, which is the global average, none of the ESCAP member states and NDB member states spend up to that. So with the exception again of Turkey, Iran, Georgia, Mongolia are close, but they're still far from the global average. So this is one, let's say, challenge that we have in terms of expenditure and social protection. The consequences of this low level of spending are many. The benefits are often too low to matter in the lives of people. Many schemes are also poverty targeted, and we see very high exclusion errors in poverty targeted schemes. I think some of the best targeted schemes are the Philippines Pantawid program, and in Georgia the Targeted Social Assistance program, and they also have exclusion errors of about 30%. So even in the best case scenario, 30% of people who should be getting the benefits do not get them. We also see high levels of fragmentation and uncoordinated implementation. We heard about this earlier in the morning's presentation. And then weak data and administrative systems, and it's very encouraging to hear of examples like the one in Indonesia where efforts are being made, and in India also there's been massive efforts. And this is a slide borrowed by colleagues at ILO, and to repeat the numbers, just to hammer them in, I won't dwell on this slide, but 61% of all people in our region are excluded from social protection. About 40% have no health coverage, so they have to spend out of pocket for any medical procedure. 66% of mothers of newborns do not have any maternity protection. Most people, or 45%, well, a little bit less than the majority, do not receive any pension at all. And that makes sense if you think of the very large informal sector in our region. And right now, I believe about 1 in 3 workers contribute to a pension scheme in Asia and the Pacific. And then child protection. 28% of children and families with children enjoy any effective access to social protection. So these are very stark numbers for our region, and they reflect the gaps that we've been talking about. And I don't think we need to convince this group of the importance of social protection, but I do want to highlight some of the results of our surveys at ESCAP and our work. This is how many people would be lifted out of poverty if countries in our region, if developing countries in our region were to reach the global average spending, not OECD spending, which is around 21%, but global average spending of 11.2% public expenditure on social protection. And that would be by 2030, 233 million people would be lifted out of the 3.2 poverty line, not the 1.9. For the 1.9 line, we find that India would eradicate extreme poverty, Philippines would eradicate extreme poverty, Nepal, Bangladesh, so large countries with large numbers of remaining poor people would eradicate extreme poverty. But even for moderate poverty, the results would be very, very impressive. And as Valerie said, social protection is increasingly being recognized as an accelerator for all the SDG goals, not just the poverty-related ones. The same analysis showed us that the Gini coefficient in the Asia-Pacific region would be reduced by about 5 percentage points, which is quite a lot, not to mention the impacts on gender inequality and on the environment, etc. Okay, there. Thank you. So this is a similar slide as the one I showed you before, but this time we have color-coded the countries by their income level. So in the Asia-Pacific region, we have countries of all income levels. The lowest income quartile in terms of GDP per capita is the red. Blue is the second lowest quartile, then wrong slide. So I think, let me see. Yellow is the the second highest quartile, correct. That's fine, sorry. So the lowest income quartile, which are the red countries, so these are countries that are below 25% in terms of income per capita in Asia and the Pacific. And these are the red countries. And you see that most of them spend below the average. But you see the exceptions of Timor-Leste and of Kyrgyzstan, which are among the region's poorest countries, and they spend above average. And they actually spend above some of the blue countries' expenditures, like Thailand, for example. In blue are countries that belong to the second lowest quartile. And again, you see many of them are below average, but exceptions like Iran and Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, they spend above the region's average. In yellow are the richer countries, the upper middle income countries in terms of the ESCAP categorization. And yes, many of them spend above average, but some of them don't, like Malaysia and Kazakhstan. They're just at the limit of, just at the global average. So what this slide needs to say or says is that it doesn't matter. The level of development of a country in terms of GDP per capita almost does not matter. What matters is political commitment. And this is where you see the difference. Some countries, irrespective of their GDP per capita levels, invest more in people. I want to finish by speaking just for 1 minute about what we do at ESCAP, or what we're trying to do at ESCAP to generate that political commitment and to harness it. We've initiated a process that was in fact called on by our member states to establish a regional modality on strengthening regional cooperation for social protection. This was a call that came at the last committee. We had a committee on social development in November. I believe Vivi was there. And we had a call for some kind of formal commitment for more collaboration on social protection, either through study tours, through exchange of experience, through maybe targets on social protection, and through monitoring mechanisms to see until 2030, to establish a baseline and to see until 2030 how countries make efforts to increase the coverage, increase the adequacy of the benefits that they provide to people. We're at the process now of negotiating this regional modality with our member states. There's already been one meeting, there's another one coming up in November. Right now, 19 member states are actively involved in the process. And those who are not are still welcome to join. We hope that by May 2020, at our annual commission session, we will be able to have a concrete agreement. We don't know in what form it will come. That's also being negotiated, whether it will be a resolution or a declaration. But the idea is to monitor this political commitment over the next 10 years until it gets us to 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ermina. Quite a starking picture in terms of, I was thinking we are estimating about 500 million poor in Asia and Pacific. So by increasing public spending to only 10% on average, it would be possible actually to halve the number of poor. So it's quite a powerful message. Now the question is also, where do we find the finances, the creativity, the options, and clearly also political commitment to this agenda, sustained political commitment. And thank you also for giving us this diverse picture globally from ILO, but also more specifically on Asia Pacific. I would really like to take the last 10 minutes for questions. I'm not sure we're supposed to have a tab, or if there are some hands up, maybe it would be good to take 2-3 questions from the floor, or they're all on the tab. By the time I read them, it's easier maybe to ask a couple of people. Nobody wants to raise a hand? Some hands, yes. Please, introduce yourself and ask the question. Short questions, we want to give space to the answers.
My name is Vimalavira, I'm from Sri Lanka. My question is, okay, right, public expenditure on social protection has to be increased, it is true. But how, if the government income is very low as a percentage of GDP, how can we, spend on social protection? So.
Right, another question from the floor here. So maybe together with this one, there's also a question about more coordination among ministries. Vivi, how is Indonesia basically achieving this political sustained commitment? And so if you can take these ones, and then please. And then.
Thank you for the question. Beside the database that I mentioned earlier, we also form a national team for the acceleration of the poverty reduction, in which the members are consisting of the ministers and go into the layers at the provincial and the district level we also formed that kind of coordination team in which help us to convey, educate, communicate, and at the end we find a way together about how developing on indicators as well as measurements and bring some capacities. Of course, there are some challenges in terms of different capacity between regions and also the different challenges of the problems. That's the thing where the other organization or stakeholders, including the local NGOs like DPOs, person with disability organization, help us in translating how the policies, the strategies that could really work at the ground level. And it took a lot of events to keep communicating because somehow, like I mentioned earlier, inclusiveness can be defined in different way. Could be only participating or inviting, participating, but not necessarily involving at the end, not giving an impact. So I think all of these need to exercising at the end need to be a measure of the effectiveness.
Thank you. Somebody wants to discuss about the budget and when low-income countries also have small budgets in percentage of GDP?
As was mentioned previously, it's not only the starting point that matters, it's really the willingness to change the situation. And at the ILO, we have we are just now publishing a good practices guide really on this question, how to increase the fiscal space for social protection. As I was mentioning, there are not only one way, there are many ways, and actually there's not one magic solution, but it's really by combining several measures or several types of measures to increase the fiscal space that what can have a result. So I was mentioning creating new taxes or increasing taxes. This is one thing, but of course for that you need to have a tax policy in place. You need to be able to have also a sort of compliance with the payment of taxes. So it means, as was mentioning Ipu Fifi, that you need to also coordinate your action with the tax authorities, with the ministries of finance, obviously. Another one was about reallocating public expenditure. So some countries, for instance, have reallocated a share of their military budget for social protection. So this is a striking example, an interesting example, but it's something that exists. It's not a dream. And a very promising avenue, I think, is really the expansion of social insurance to the informal economy. It seems very difficult like this because we know that it's difficult for informal economy workers to register, to contribute on a regular basis. But the countries that have managed to do it by also facilitating the life of these workers by creating, for instance, like in Latin America, many Latin American countries have developed what they call monotax. So it's a system where the informal economy worker will pay both its taxes and contributions, social security contributions, to the same institution. So it's just a very simple payment mechanism. Of course, the level of social security contributions is much lower than in the formal sector as an incentive as well to enter the scheme. So there are many experiences. And actually at the ILO, you will see we have when you go out of this room on the left, there is our exhibition on 100 years of social protection, and you will see that there is a publication about 100 cases of successful experiences to expand coverage. And if you want, we can discuss, and I can share with you some of the cases that are really relevant for your question. Thank you.
Valerie, I think you covered all my points in my response. The only thing I wanted to add is what you also emphasized earlier, which is that it's important to see social protection as an investment, not just as an expenditure. Like as you said, it's when you give people $1, it multiplies. It becomes 1.5 in terms of expenditure in the communities. And I think this is an important message for policymakers, that it's not just a cost it's not charity, it's an investment in people's human development. And I think this is maybe one of the more powerful arguments for ministries of finance as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We have just one last question for Vivi. I think it's more into, I think there will be more opportunities to discuss about how to finance these agendas, but specifically about Indonesia, what is the lessons learned by handling the fuel subsidies? Because obviously it's been a sensitive area of, I'm sure, controversial. And so some of the members of the public would really like to understand what were the key success, I guess, decisions that made it acceptable.
Yeah, it was back in 2006 when we could identify and show where the people are, not necessarily the poor. I think when we are talking about the social protection, we should aware about the missing middle. So that's why having or developing good data for at least like 40% lowest income group is kind of like an asset or entry point of the effort. By having that, we could then make or developing a targeting mechanism, not necessarily like poverty targeting, but to ensure that all the programs that we have goes to the right person or the needy one, including the vulnerable, like I mentioned. I also want to add a point that Ermina already mentioned about the investment. The point that I want to make is increasing the value of the investment itself. So for example, for the food voucher, we are transferring around like 100, next year will going to be 150,000 rupiah. But the way we deliver need to be agile, so through digital payment. Of course, we also have to encouraging and improving the capacity of the social workers, the facilitators, to make sure that the people have a good option of food and improving the quality of the food itself, not only to the parents, elderly, but also to the children. Stunting and also improving the nutrition that's the value that I mean go beyond of the size of the benefit itself. So again, social protection needs a lot of hands, not necessarily on the budget side only.
Okay, thank you very much for this overview. There will be more opportunities in the course of the next today and the next 3 days to deep dive in these discussions. A big applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. And now I think it's lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you to our moderator and speakers. Our next program is actually the opening of the exhibitions before the lunch. I would like to invite you to join my colleagues at the cafeteria hallway. There will be a short choir performance, and then there will be a short remarks by Kiara. After that, you can all proceed for lunch at the private dining area. We will return to this place at 2 p.m. today. So enjoy your break, and I'll see you later.